Good evening. Thank you, Ekwa, for joining me. My name is Liz Ishimwe-Tsenyimba, and I'm a film curator. I'm a film programmer for IFFR, International Film Festival Rotterdam, and I'm also a film curator for Recognition, which is a film program based in Brussels. I've been running the program for 5 years, and what I do is I try to do film screenings every month for African films, African diasporan films. And it's a pleasure to be able to screen your film. I'm screening your film on the 23rd of October at Berskaberg at 8:30. It's a pity that, of course, you will not be able to join us live because you are somewhere even better in Fespaco. It's way too cold to be in Brussels, so I think Fespaco is a better deal. Yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So by the time that this video will be shared, the audience would have watched the film. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about the process of making this film, because I think most people think about the film as in the I'm sitting down and I'm writing a film and then I am sending it to festivals, but it's way more complicated than that.
It is. It very much is. This film was something that had been on my mind for a long time because it was inspired by a relationship of an aunt and uncle of mine who have been separated since the mid-90s due to visa immigration issues. And for years and years, they've applied and been denied for visas. And, it's just kind of been this family story. And years ago, when he was making another campaign to apply for visas for my aunt to come, I just had this idea of like, I wonder, okay, let's say she gets her visa, then what happens? So she shows up in America and start from where, like what kinds of things would they, my aunt, I've seen my aunt change over the years and she's become very religious and, it's been really hard for her. They've been in touch, he calls every week and, sends money and does all these things, but they've lived very different lives. And what would it be like, and I had this image of my uncle at the airport in the reception hall, waiting for the family to come out the gates, and what would he be thinking and what would he be feeling and what would he for that day, and because it's this mountain that they've been climbing for so long, and when you finally get to the top, what do you do? So that was the inspiration of it. And I was talking to my producing partner about just the story of my relatives, and she was like, wow, that's amazing, we should do that. I had gotten a cash prize from a previous short film that I had written and directed. And the prize needed me to make a short film and turn it around in a year. And so I thought, okay, it was a very small cash prize, but maybe I can make a short prequel to this bigger story that I have. Just as like a proof of concept. So that's where it started. I made this small proof of concept called Farewell Meu Amor. And at that time I was doing a lot of dance, a lot of Kizomba dance. And so that was sort of in my world. And I was thinking about the relationships that people have on the dance floor and how in Kizomba in particular, there's a kind of connection that one needs to have in order to know which way your partner wants you to go. And what would it be like for this couple that maybe had a dance life together, but because of these years of separation, they're literally out of step. So that's how that dance aspect entered the story. So we made the short prequel in 2016, shot it, kind of finished it in, shot it in one day, 2 actors, 1 location, 8 hours. Wow. Presented it at the festival. We worked on it a little bit more. I didn't have a lot of money. So of course we're, borrowing favors and things of that nature. And then presented it at a festival in 2017, where I was during the Q&A talking about this feature that I had in mind. And somebody from Tribeca Film Institute approached me and offered or asked me to apply for their feature development program. So then it was like, okay, I have to start working on the script. So that's at the point that we started actually in earnest working on the script and writing the story. And as I was working on it, I was like, well, I love the story of Walter, who's my main character. But the story of a guy having an affair and he doesn't know what to do is a little cliche. So maybe I'll do it from the daughter's perspective, and I can sort of use my own experience of being a teenager about that age, 17, and coming to the US and the culture shock and all of those things. But because she had a dance element and I'm making this film in the US, when you have Black youth dancing, it becomes automatically an urban dance movie and gets put in sort of that pile over there. And I didn't want that for the film because I felt like it had more to say. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll do the two of them, because they do have very unique experiences, even though they're experiencing the same event. So initially I had written as Walter and Sylvia's story, just the two. And, about 6 to 8 months into the process, it was like, this is not going to work unless I have Esther, because her story is dictating everybody else's story. And so then it became a triptych at that point. So I went back and rewrote it as a triptych and tried to figure out at what points do they intersect, at what points of the stories intersect. And just this idea of they're all experiencing the same event, which is their reunion, their happy reunion. Yay, we're here, we made it. But each of them, because of their backstory, is having a very unique experience of that event. And I didn't want to sacrifice anyone's experience for the other person. I didn't want to only look at Esther and not look at anybody else, So that was fun. It was challenging. So that was 2017 going into 2018. 2018, my producer and I were pitching the project for the whole year. I got into a few screenwriting labs that helped me to develop the story more. She got into a producing lab at Sundance, again, also developing sort of contacts and figuring out where we're going to fund the film. 2019, we met some funders, got some people interested, started the pre-production of looking for actors, trying to figure out who our lead would be, because my lead from the short was booked on a Broadway show for the rest of the year and he wasn't available. So we started casting in May of 2019. We started casting for our Sylvia, because that was the one character that, I had a lot of needs. I needed her to do an accent. I needed her to dance. We wanted somebody older, but who could look younger and, those kinds of things. We started pre-production in June and went into production in July through August for 5 weeks. And then we were editing as we were going, because when we had gone to Sundance in 2019, everybody that we met when we were pitching for money, we had told them, we're going to be back in 2020 with a finished film. And everyone was like, that's a ridiculous idea. And we're like, you just don't know who we are. And it was, in fact, a ridiculous idea, but we did it. So we were editing as we were shooting. So we finished shooting at the end of August. I got a week off and then we went straight into the edit room, and because we were editing to try and get to the Sundance deadline to apply for Sundance, we found out we got in November. So then it was like, okay, no Christmas, no Thanksgiving, no holidays for us. We're editing the whole, and we literally finished our edit 5 days before our premiere at Sundance 2020. And then we had a wonderful premiere. And then the pandemic happened and the world shut down. And, here we are. But we managed to sell it and, just slowly getting the film out into the world, which has been really beautiful.
Yeah, I've been following the kind of like the roll up of the film, and it's had really great success, and it's amazing because I think for a lot of films COVID completely stopped so many so many projects. But it was really nice to kind of follow, because I was actually planning to screen your film as well last year, and I was like, oh damn, so I have to wait, and it's like no,
Yeah.
but it's good that it had its own life and it was able to continue.
Yeah.
I think one of the for me when I was watching the film, you know, I'm a refugee from Rwanda. And you know, I've actually realized that I want to claim this identity, even if I get my citizenship. I think I still want to, you know, talk about the fact that I am a refugee, and I don't think I will ever feel at home anywhere.
Mhm.
But I think when it comes to a lot of films about immigration, films that are made not made necessarily not in our favor, you get to have a
Sure.
sense that it's made in a certain way.
Yeah.
While in your film, immigration is one of the themes, but it's not the most important, because what we realize is that we are actually getting to experience and getting to know these characters collectively as a family, but also individually. Um,
Mhm.
and I wanted to ask you about that, because I imagine that you had these ideas when you were writing it, but to also see that playing out on screen, it must have been a really beautiful experience.
It was, it was a very interesting question, which I didn't, I wasn't like, listen, I'm going to write a script and it's not going to be about policies. Um, because to me, it just, again, like I said, the inspiration was the story of my relatives and what they had been through. So that's where I started, was the people involved and what their experience was. I don't know enough about immigration. I mean, immigration in the US is just so complicated, and there's just so many different levels of visas and this and that. And I don't know any of that stuff. And I wasn't interested in doing the research to find out. And of course, 2016, that time was when we had Trump, and all of the rhetoric around immigrants being like dirty, terrible people who are here to rob and pillage and kill and rape, and all of the stuff that was in the news. And again, they're just sort of like, it's a label that's put on this faceless group of folks who are like, be scared, and it's like, but who are these people? Who are these people who are risking their lives, children strapped to their back, going through so much to cross a border for what? To come and rape you? Why? Because at home they have no, like, that doesn't make sense, that somebody would leave their home somewhere and be like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to go to America. I'm going to just cause destruction. Like, that doesn't make any kind of sense. Nobody wants to go through all that just to come and harm you. They have families, they have loves, they have lives. Like, nobody who wants to leave their family and everyone they know, the food, the culture, the, grandpa and grandpa, whatever, so that they can come and mess up your life. Like, that doesn't make any kind of sense. If anything, they're probably leaving because some sort of American or Western policy has made it unlivable where they're from initially. And they're here like everybody else. This is a country of immigrants, right? From Italy, from all sorts of folks from Europe who've come to
Right.
make a better life for their families.
Mm.
And there are people who come from war, and there are people who come from all sorts of things. But at the base, it's all about, like, I want a better life for myself and my family. And that's something that we never talk about, is like who these people are and what have they left behind. And what does it take to get here? What does it take to be together? And then when you aren't together, what is it like for you? For you, not for them, but for this unit. And that's something that I certainly had never seen. And even when, I was working with my DP to look into references, visual references, etc. I mean, the only other person that I've come across who's made films about African immigrants living in the US, or in New York in particular, is Andrew Dosunmu, wonderful Nigerian filmmaker who did
Right.
Restless City and Mother of George. But yeah, for me, it was a very important approach
Mhm.
to look at the people, that were discussed, that are being discussed, and not so much the policies. I didn't really care about that, but it made it very difficult to sell the film. I mean, what to get funders, people read the script and loved the story. But when we were trying to sell the film in distribution and marketing, it was a conversation. It was a task, because the ways in which African films in particular, and I'm sure it's true for probably South American films as well, the films that tend to get funded and get distributed and get people behind it and sort of like, ooh, look at this film, is either about the most exceptional African that ever lived, or, the issue-driven story, the child soldier, the Boko Haram, the Rwanda genocide person, the person suffering and dying, and then somebody swoops in, usually a white person, to save them. And like, then you have the music in the background and we're like, yay, humanity's been restored. And so there was a lot of marketing people who were just like, we really don't know how to, we love your story. We don't know how to market it, because we don't know, even though I'm having this emotional reaction and experience with your film, somehow I don't believe anybody else will.
Wow.
Unless it's about Nelson Mandela or a child soldier. It's like, that doesn't make any kind of sense. That doesn't make it. Somehow you can create empathy for any number of faceless, nameless white people having whatever experience in America. But when it comes to Black people, it's like, we don't know how to sell that. It's just too hard. It's impossible. No one's ever done it. It's never going to work. And it's just like, so it was very beautiful to, we only had our screenings in Sundance. We had 6 wonderful screenings that, packed houses. And to see all of these people who weren't just African people, who weren't just immigrants, but all of these people who had such huge reactions to the film, was really actually just kind of mind-boggling. I didn't even know to expect that. I'd gone in with very low expectations just to protect my heart. But it ended up being very, very beautiful.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, because I do think that when I watched the film, and I was talking about this earlier this week when I was in the workshop, I do think that most of the, the African films that do make it to the international festivals, or, by chance that they also make it to cinemas or in some sort of theatrical release, they're of a certain story. And I feel like actually a lot of these institutions or the film industry doesn't know what to do with, Black joy. Like they're just,
they don't.
Yeah.
It's not just African films, because a lot of my African American friends struggle with the same thing too. If it's not like an urban movie of some guy trying to get out of the hood, or just beautiful bodies doing beautiful body things on the screen, or some urban dancing, or some this and that, people are like, we don't know how to market it. We don't know who to sell it to. And the idea that like, they're just people, like it is somehow a foreign concept. It's very, very interesting to observe, and also very frustrating, of course. There's just, it's a huge lack of imagination when it comes to Black bodies, Black stories, Black experiences, where everyone goes blank and has nothing to say, which should change.
Absolutely.
Basically.
I agree. And I think also one of my favorite things about this film is that, we are focusing on the Angolan diaspora. So I lived in Namibia for 11 years, and I grew up with, with Angolan friends and everything. So for me, it was great. And I was asking myself, I said, wait, when was the last time I saw a film about the, Angolan diaspora community?
Yeah.
And I can't think of one.
Sambizanga, I think, was a film that was maybe made in the 90s or 2000s And I think it was about the war, the civil war in Angola. For me, that's the only film I've ever seen about Angola or Angolans that has Portuguese. And because it was in Portuguese, I remember, I think it was programmed, I probably watched it at the New York African Film Festival. That's the only place that I've ever seen anything that, you know, for real about Africa. There's not much that I know of, I will also say, I don't speak Portuguese. I've never been to Angola. And because of language stuff, well, let me back up by saying, first of all, with any kind of African film in this part of the world, different from Europe, they're just before there was digital access to things, there are very few places that will show those kinds of films. I did not even know, I grew up on the continent and I'd never seen any African films until, you know, the 2000s when I lived in New York, because we never grew up watching any African films, any African content. You know, there was some slapstick comedy on TV, but everything was, you know, the Cosby shows at best. There was no content of the people that I was surrounded with, that I grew up with. So things didn't really change until you could start finding things on YouTube. People could start searching online and finding, you know, and therefore, because of the digital access and the digital, like the access to equipment and digital distribution, where more people are able to make films and more people are able to put things online and put things in places where you didn't have to go to Cannes to watch the one African film that they have or something. You know, they became a lot of smaller screening venues like your own, or, you know, like different places like that, where it wasn't also dependent on the one maybe European person who's programming, who might have never, like, it doesn't even cross, people don't actually think about African cinema unless they're in African cinema. You know, they'll think of French New Wave, they'll think of Italian, they'll think of Asian cinema, they'll maybe think about Bollywood a little bit, but with brown people, it's just like, what's going on over there? So yeah, it's kind of a new concept. And then because of language stuff, with Portuguese speakers, the Lusophones, we rarely get to even hear their music, you know, like here now with Afrobeat, there's so, you know, everyone here thinks Afrobeat is Jamaican music, it's reggae music because of the beats. And it's like, no, those are Nigerians or Ghanaians or something. So that has spread. With certain communities, you'll hear some of the Francophone music, the Fali Pupas, the Congolese stuff. But you never hear Kizomba, Kuduro, you know, which is amazing music. And, you know, because like I said, I was in that community doing dance, it's something that I loved so much. And I can hear the Congo aspects of it and all of this, but it's just like, man, you guys are missing out if you think Afrobeat is as far as it goes. Like, we won't even go to history, but just like, even just this year, music that came out this year on the continent, like there's so much. And so again, because of language stuff, it's just something, at least in this part of the world, that people don't really look into. And so that was also an aspect that I wanted to be able to kind of pull in some of these things that are like, yo, it's bigger than you can even imagine. You have no idea. We have a lot more happening on the continent than you even, the continent and the diaspora, than you even know.
Indeed. And I think when I watched the scene of Walter dancing with Linda, my heart just melted. I was like, oh my God. And this was like, when I watched the film, it was like in the middle of COVID, it was March, and we just like entered into lockdown. And I said, oh my God, when are we ever gonna dance like that?
I know, the Kizomba parties, I was so fortunate to have my friends, you know, people that I dance with, that all came as extras and spent the night dancing over and over again to, you know, whatever songs that we had there. And I miss it. That's something I look forward to getting back to once we can touch each other again safely.
Yeah. So another remarkable thing about the film, besides the really wonderful music. I mean, the score was well done,
Thank
and the
you.
cast, of course. But it was the wonderful sex scene. So I was like, okay, wow, this is really beautiful, because it felt like I'm watching my aunt, and or I'm watching my parents. And I mean, I should have had this, but it was really like, oh wow, this is beautiful. And I
Oh,
can't
thank
say how many times, I don't think I've seen that,
you.
that kind of scene between Africans of that age
Yeah,
engaging in that kind of intimacy on
yeah.
screen, that didn't feel like it was shameful or anything, or we're being shy. It was really sexy,
Mm-hmm.
actually. Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was, as I was leaning into Esther's story and who she was, and, she's this religious person, but it was like, just because you're religious doesn't mean that there's no desire.
Right.
And also, she's been separated from her husband for 17 years.
Mhm.
This woman has needs that need to be met. And damn it. Um, and like you, I've barely, there's been, I think Safi Fai has a film that had a sex scene,
Mhm.
a young girl, it was set in Senegal, a film she shot, I think, in the 70s. Maybe someone has kissed somewhere along the way, but they tend to be young people, sort of
Yes,
young,
indeed. Yeah.
hip people doing things. Mati Diop's film had some sex and some kissing, a few years
Mhm.
ago, but again, young people. And I was like, yeah, let's see some middle-aged woman having ecstasy.
Oh,
Like that would be
yes.
amazing. Because I'd like to think that they do. If I've never really asked my aunties what their intimate experiences are like, but I'd like to put it out there that some 40-some-year-old woman might be enjoying intimacy with her husband, and I think that, along with so many other things around the problematic nature of not growing up seeing our own images, it's like
Mhm.
every reference that we have, even for intimacy, tends to be based off of how many white people we've seen living their life, based off
Right.
of how they kiss, how they, what he says, he cups her face, he strokes her hair, and then he says, you complete me, and
Mhm.
whatever it is. And it's like, but do we really say that? Is that really how it goes down? And if it does, is that because you've been watching 80s movies from America, guy who's trying to complete me, or is it because that's what feels natural? We've never seen that. And of course, in most African family setups, there's not really public displays of affection in the way that they happen for Western people. Affection might be, sort of teasing or joking, or maybe holding hands at the most, or, service, to one another, if you're talking about love languages, but it's not people smooching and rolling around in the grass, usually. And certainly not in terms of our parents' generations. And so it really just requires imagination of like, okay, well, what would that look like? And,
Mhm.
because we also come from societies where even if we don't speak about it publicly, people are not just having sex for procreation.
Yeah.
There are, especially when it comes to religious, the religious outlook on sex and the purpose of it. But I mean, you're from Rwanda. There's like whole, the Sengas, and like we have institutions that have been there for generations of teaching men and women
Mhm.
about how to enjoy intimacy, and not just at the service of your partner,
Right.
of your husband, but for you, and so that you go into your marriage empowered and knowing what your body does and how it reacts and what oils to use and what scents to use and what things to chew and aphrodisiacs to add to his bath water and to the massage and to the this and so there is pleasure, um but we just don't see it as publicly in the same way as we do in Western cultures. And so there is an aspect of having to imagine what that might be like. So that was actually very exciting to imagine what it might be like for this very religious woman to be pleasured by her husband.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just, yeah, it's because, I think you're absolutely right in the sense that, I've attended, for example, bridal showers where,
Yep.
you had the aunties that took, the bride to be in the room and, gave her all this advice. And, and of course that advice comes from somewhere, that advice comes from experience, that advice comes from pleasure. But indeed it's, it takes creative kind of writing skills like you have to imagine how that would look like on screen, because we don't have experience of seeing that, and also don't have experience of reading about that. And also just also thinking about how well you wrote the script. I just wanted to ask, maybe, do you have any advice for somebody right now sitting down trying to imagine writing their story, immigrants living in Brussels, for example, and they're like trying to put some words to paper, or they've managed to do that, but there's a particular scene that they don't know how to translate. Is there something that you learn from, this writing process of yours that you would want to share?
Well, that's a great question. This was a very difficult writing process just because of the format of the story with the triptych, the triple stories. I hadn't written something like that before. I had a lot of deadlines, which was stressful, very stressful, but it did help me to I have to be done by this. I just kind of need to focus on it. And I had charts and graphs about when this happens here, that happens there. And that's usually not necessarily how I plan for my screenwriting when I'm just following one character and sort of what their story is. It's useful. It has been not even useful. It has been my lifeline to work in the company of other people. So not to be by myself doing that. That's the quickest way to get discouraged and to stop and to wonder what's on Facebook again, whether something new has appeared in my fridge. When I'm working alone, it's not possible. When I say working with company, it doesn't have to be physical company. I do a lot of online working dates where just the way you are with me now, we'll check in. Okay, what are we doing? What are you doing? Okay, we'll set a timer, we'll mute ourselves, and then we'll write for an hour. And then we'll check in and how's it going? Oh my God, I ended up on the couch. I fell asleep. Oh, I got down an Instagram hole. All right, let's start again, reset the clock, do another hour, and maybe this time something, and just kind of, a lot of writing is just one foot in front of the other. Some days are great and you're just like, pew, 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 pew. And then some days are terrible and you might get a half a page in if you're lucky. So that, and just a lot of almost like journal writing to myself, free writing, especially when I get stuck in terms of trying to figure out what it is that I want to say. I'll interview characters on screen, as I'm writing, not in the script, but in a separate document, Microsoft Word document, where I'll be like, Ekwa says, so what are you thinking right now, Walter? And then Walter's like, you get on my nerves. And, and we'll go back and forth, and I'll ask him these questions and see what he says. For this particular script, I also worked with music a lot. I mean, that's something that for me is very important. I have a music background. and I love to dance, and this was a film about music and dance. And so I had created playlists for each character, because I tend to listen to music when I'm writing, but it has to be music that I won't end up getting up and singing and dancing to, because then I won't be writing. But for this, I needed music that, so when I was writing Walter's character, I had a playlist of the kinds of music that he would be listening to. And it just helped me to sort of get into his space versus the kind of music that Sylvia would listen to, which is a lot more energetic and upbeat. And so getting into her space and her thinking, and then, all the Christian gospel music that Esther would be listening to sort of feel her energy a little bit. So that worked for this. I haven't necessarily used that for all the scripts that I've written or all the characters that I've written, but that was really useful for this particular piece. So, I mean, I think the most important thing is just to not write in isolation. Isolation is very difficult for any artist, but particularly for writers. When you're shooting something, there's so much energy because there's so many people on set and everyone's making decisions and you're bouncing off of each other and it's amazing. And even when you're editing, you're with the editor, maybe there's multiple editors, it's a smaller crowd, but the producers are adding their notes, there's other people, but writing tends to be like just you stabbing yourself in the face, which is a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
So find some people.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And my last question, kind of taking into account that we are still in a very difficult phase, and kind of coming to terms, the fact that life has changed, even though people are wanting to go back to normal, the normal doesn't exist anymore. But just looking at your future, is there anything that you're very much excited about?
Yeah, I am. I really am. I mean, aside from like what's on my desk right now, I am just excited about the possibilities that are there that even 5 years ago was not quite the same conversation. Black Lives Matter protest last year has definitely raised the consciousness. We're not quite at the point to see exactly how conscious we've become, but at least in terms of what people are saying and some of the things that they're following up with, where there's at least an awareness that we aren't really doing well in the representation of people of color, in the representation of women, Me Too movement. And so there are people who are looking for me specifically because I'm a woman of color. Mm-hmm. And also because I'm an African woman, where there's a lot of people who want to tell Africa stories, but traditionally it's just been some white guy who loves safaris, who's, been given this job. And it's like, we can do better. We can really do better. And so I'm not saying I love all the stuff that's coming my way, but I'm excited to see that there is stuff coming my way. I'm excited to see people actually willing to have a conversation about, like, will show me their work trepidatiously, and I can try to lovingly be like, okay, this is a wonderful attempt. Now let's try and actually have the African person lead the story, or now let's try and like, how can we say this without making this the story about the person that we don't actually really care about? Maybe, your white guilt can be worked on outside the screen, and we can just work on what the story is with these people, So there's probably going to be that. There's probably going to be a lot of that. And it's not just about like racism, but even with sexism, where it's just like, yeah, women don't really do that. I know that's what you've seen for a really long time, but we have a variety of emotions which we can, like really look into. And then even just also trying to move things so that I don't get stuck just making stories about immigrants. I love immigrants and I love Africans, and I always will do that. But I love making stories about other things. I love espionage. I love thrillers. I love comedies. There's a lot of things that I'd like to do too. And so like really pressing my team to find other work and, sort of push those barriers, because unless we do that work, it's not going to happen on its own. I have a few projects on my desk that I'm working on simultaneously, which is exciting and challenging. I have a feature film that is not announced yet, so I can't really talk about it, but it's a US film. So it's my first film where I'm looking at an African-American experience, a historical, it's a period piece. It's a heavy film. It's a very heavy film. So it's taking me a little while to work on it. And, it's an interesting experience for me to, where it's not just a story from my head or from some funny person that I know, but it's, based on true events. And therefore there's a respect and a lot of research. I mean, I did a lot of research for Farewell Amor too, but research on, being able to sort of respect those particular people who actually did live, were actually alive, and making sure I honor their story. And then also thinking about, there's a lot of heavy stories. There's a lot of heavy stories. Unfortunately, a lot of our experiences as Black people involves heaviness and correctly telling our own histories is something that's really important as well. We've had our histories and our stories told by other people, and we've been othered in our own stories for so long. So there is a way that we have to sort of redo a lot of this, but it also means that we have to relive through a lot of things, and a lot of unpleasant things, and that's hard. It's really, really hard. So for me as an artist, it's also thinking about self-care a lot and community a lot, and support, and what is it that I would want, or that my closest friends would want to hear or take away from this experience. It's not just information about terrible things that happen and documenting it, but where's the hope? Where is the where's the hope? What is the contradiction to the pain that is inherently there? Because as people, we're very resilient. We really have been very resilient in the face of all sorts of tragedies. And so even with painful experiences, yes, we'll cry, but we'll also laugh, but we'll also love, but we'll also dance, but we'll also sing, but we'll also tease each other. We'll come up with creative ways for us to survive. That's true of human beings in general, regardless of color. And so it's important to have those things in the stories, and being able to tell those stories from my experience and from my perspective is a huge honor. And it's something I'm very excited about doing. So I have a film that's based in Chad and Senegal that's coming up. I have a series about some immigrants, a mini series about that's based off of a book that we'll be working on in New York. A series in development in Kenya. So there's a number of different things that are on the boiler, and we'll see how they go, and it will take some time, but I'm really excited to sort of lend my perspective to it. We've spent at least a century looking at the world through the lens of white men. Yeah. And now we get to see it through everybody else's lens. Really excited.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah. It was great to meet you, even though it's via Zoom. I'm pretty sure we're going to meet each other in person real soon. Yeah. But thank you for your film. Thank you for adding a beautiful African story to the canon. It's especially, I think, for for us, that's what we want to see after this really very hard year that was for a lot of people very lonely.
Yeah.
And to be able to go to cinema and watch a story that leaves you feeling hopeful and excited and, wanting to come back and listen to Kizomba and Kuduro. Absolutely. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The music playlist is on Spotify.
Mm.
If you search for Farewell Amor, so feel free to download it and enjoy. And I thank you for having us here at your festival. It's a great honor to share this work with you.
Thank you.